Okay, so I was a little obsessed with Salem witch trials as a kid, so I read all the accounts, and there's some really weird stuff, and I know everyone's asking about bird penis, but what's the weirdest thing you found in your research?
Oh, gosh, I wouldn't even know where to begin. There's so much. You've read it, so you will get this. The thing that was most interesting to me, and it's the origin of the whole series in a way, was two things. One was that clearly the events really exploded when this woman, Tituba, confessed. Her character fascinated me because no one seemed to know anything about her. They had thought perhaps she was an African slave. It later came out that perhaps no, she was actually South American, and a South American Indian. The fact that she's one of the only ones who, and one of the first ones to confess to everything and then seemingly was not punished or wasn't hung or anything, and then she kind of mysteriously disappears from history. So, I was fascinated by that. The other thing that fascinated me was that in her accounts and some of the accounts around it, they talk about the fact that somebody had made a witch cake to feed to the children who had been possessed that would supposedly help them either get unpossessed or point to who had possessed them. And then the powers that be got very upset because they thought that this was itself a form of witchcraft, and this was one of the reasons that they had arrested Tituba. But they all acknowledged that Tituba did not bake the witch cake. She just delivered it. It was baked by a good Puritan woman named Mary Sibley, who, though there was a little bit of kind of this tisk-tisking going, you shouldn't be messing with things, no one ever stopped to ask, well, doesn't that mean maybe Mary Sibley was a witch? And that was like the birth of the whole thing of like, oh my goodness, what if the witches were hidden amongst the Puritans and were doing all this themselves?
Well, it's interesting because there was a scene at the end of last season where Increase has all protection from witchcraft, and it all looks like witchcraft.
Exactly.
And why he was allowed to do it. So that, which actually brings me to Increase, because dead people don't really always stay dead in shows like this. Are we possibly going to see any returns of anyone?
I have to be very careful that we don't want to, no spoilers here. I will say a couple things. A, the wall between the living and the dead is much thinner in Salem, as we've already seen, than it is perhaps in our world. We've already seen someone's face removed and brought back to life just to question him from hell. And we've seen images of people come back to people. So, A, there's that. B, what I will say is one of the fascinating things about the period that we're dealing with is that the ghost as we know it, and the ghost who acts as we know it, who comes back because of something being uncompleted that needs to be finished, that kind of thing, is an idea that seems to first really come full-blown into this period. So it would not be like me to be able to resist playing with that. Now, as to any particular characters who come back, I would simply say the stronger the character, the more forceful their personality, well, of course, the likelier it might be that they might breach the boundaries between this world and the next.
Nice. That didn't seem too spoilery.
Thank you.
Hints. So Anne's interesting. It's being a cradle witch seems to give you more power than being a witch around these parts normally does. So how is that going to shift balance?
Well, in all kinds of ways, and there's a lot of mysteries to be discovered about Anne without giving anything away. We already know what many suspected last year, that she potentially had witchy powers. And if you go back and watch the season again, you'll see the hints that are coming bit by bit throughout the season. My favorite being when she's lost in the woods and starts to cry and it starts to rain. And then she stops crying and it stops raining and she's like, huh. And then we just kind of keep going. But that is actually going to turn out to be a very significant clue to not only her witchy powers, but to which branch on the witch tree she actually belongs.
Oh. Ooh. First of all, I love that you call them witchy powers. That just makes me happy. And speaking of hereditary witches, you have Lucy Lawless in this season as Countess Marburg. So tell me a little bit about that. That was a pretty dramatic entrance.
Yeah, it is. Look, I can't tell you how thrilled we were to have her. She's a great addition to already, I think, one of the best casts on television, frankly, speaking purely objectively. She brings a lot of iconic status and stature to her, but she also just fell in love with this part. We were approached about it by the fact that she had actually seen the show and loved it first season. So, and she's a great fan and a great watcher of things, but also incredibly literate actor. So I think the fact that this character is not only a great genre figure, a super powerful witch, but one who has a kind of almost Shakespearean scale, I think, was attractive to her, and she was certainly attractive to us. And the minute we knew that she was going to play this part, the part, kind of grew also to meet the stature of the actor we were going to get to work with.
Nice. Well, John now is dealing with the Mohawks, and I thought it was very interesting that he has a familiar put into his neck, very similar to witchcraft.
Well, this goes back to the issue you raised before about magic versus counter magic. One of the most interesting things I discovered in really researching the whole realm of witchcraft and magic in what's called the early modern period. So not the Middle Ages, but not us, but say 16th century, 17th century, even into the 18th century, is that there's this whole realm of people who are not called witches, but are called like cunning men or cunning women, who existed throughout this world and who basically are the people you would go to for all kinds of minor medical problems, or to find something you had lost, or to ensure that your son or daughter had a good marriage. They were kind of a combination of doctor and advisor and shrink and all kinds of things. So there was a whole subculture of basically magic that was bubbling up. The thing you have to understand is this. Everybody in this world believed in magic. The only kind of magic that was even explicitly against the law was malice, which was for a while the original title of the show, before we decided Salem was a better, clearer title. Malice is the type of magic that's used to harm someone. That was illegal and punishable by death, in part because it implied a deal with the devil. Every other kind of magic was being used. Everybody from the lowest to the highest in that world was having recourse to magic.
Well, last question. Mary Sibley, good or evil?
There is nobody in this show who is purely one or the other. One of my favorite lines in the show is when she says to Anne, having helped magically dissuade her or pull her out of her suicidal funk, and she says, look, neither the world, the flesh, nor the devil is arrayed like a Puritan suit in pure black and white. It's all gray. And that's one of the big themes here and one of the big funs of the show, I think. There really is nobody you can point to on the show who's all good or all bad.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.